Okay, so it's NANOG 50, and we wanted to celebrate NANOG and it's all the things that have happened here over the years. So I went and I looked at the past meetings, and it's really quite interesting. If you go on the www.nanog.org and look at their past meetings, there's archives all the way back, but they don't have the first meeting. So you can look at the second one and look at the kind of things that people were talking about. It's really quite illuminating. But so we were trying to figure out who would be the appropriate keynote for NANOG 50, and it turned out that one of the people who shepherded what was then Joint Techs into what is now NANOG was Elise Garrick, and she gracefully accepted our invitation to talk, so we're really looking forward to having her talk. She's standing over there. Come on over. She has a talk called The End of the Beginning, I'm really looking forward to it, but one of the other things that I kind of found interesting about it is that she doesn't have any PowerPoint. No slides. So this, it's like, remember the day when there was no slides? Well, maybe some of you guys maybe don't, but it used to be that, there was no slides, and then there was transparencies. Remember that? Draw on the transparencies, and then there was PowerPoint and all, But anyway, so please welcome Elise, and we're looking forward to your talk.
Thanks, Dave. Actually, I was looking for the overhead projector since this is about the end of the beginning. I want to thank you all very much for inviting me to speak at the 50th meeting of NANOG. I spoke at the first, and now I get to speak at the 50th. It's quite a privilege. So, the end of the beginning. The reason I chose this title for the 50th is that I was asked to speak, actually, about the beginning. And the beginning was the regional techs, and that was back in 1988, and you probably all have read your history books about that. But the regional techs was the beginning, and in 1994, it was kind of the end of that beginning. In 1994, we had the last regional techs meeting in San Diego, and we said, okay, this is the time we're having a technology transfer. The National Science Foundation, which had been funding the NSFNet backbone and the regional networks, was actually going to phase out. They were going to transfer all that technology to commercial service providers, and that was going to be it. We were going to kind of close the doors on the NSFNet. Regional techs had grown up as part of the NSFNet, because when NSFNet started, it was a collaboration between IBM, MCI, and Merit. And at the first regional techs meeting, MCI and IBM got kind of blasted by the regional techs guys. First of all, they didn't believe MCI knew anything about data, which was true. They didn't believe IBM knew anything about building routers, which was true. And they really didn't believe Merit could pull it off with IBM and MCI. So after that kind of interesting meeting, in fact, there's a small story about that. It was the first meeting that I'd attended, and many of the people that had been hired for the NSFNet backbone. And my name's Elise Phoebus Garrick, Phoebus with a P. So anyway, I was wearing one of those monogram sweaters that were quite popular back in the 80s. So it said E, a big G in the middle, and a P. And I was standing there, and Ed Kroll from University of Illinois came up to me and said, "What's your metric?" So if you know what that means, you're as old as I am. So my monogram was EGP. But anyway, so we thought we really need to get together and build a community here. The regional techs, the regional guys were their own individual communities. Merit was its own individual community. And IBM and MCI were the new guys, and we were bringing them into the community. So we said, we need to bring us all together because we're going to have to work very, very hard in order to make this thing work. And so that was the kind of reason that regional techs got started. And Susan Hares was one of the first people to kind of come up with the agendas. And she finally turned that over to me because she was too busy building the policy routing database. But at one of the first meetings, she said, you know, we're going to have snacks during the breaks. And we're going to also have to have lunch, because, you know, Elise likes to eat. So I'm like mortified. I'm saying, oh my God. But that kind of started this trend. You know, that was the beginning of all the food at NANOG meetings and regional tech meetings. We've never been foodless since. So anyway, we started the regional tech meeting, and that became very, very popular. It quickly, I think I touched something on the computer, sorry. That quickly expanded beyond our immediate community. More and more academic and research networks from across the world started participating in the regional tech meetings. There started to be commercial service providers, Alternet and others that got started, PSINet. They started attending the meetings. Then vendors like to come too, so Cisco and others like to show up. So as we were doing this technology transfer in 1994, we had this meeting in San Diego, and we said, okay, the regional tech has been highly successful. Do you guys want to continue? It was a community question. It was a room much like this. Mark Knopper and I were there on the stage trying to find out, okay, does anyone really care if regional tech continues? There was overwhelming response. Everybody wanted to do it. We liked each other. We liked working together. We were inclusive. So we said, okay, but if we're going to do this, you know, we can't be regional techs anymore, because this really isn't about the regional networks in the United States. This is about the global internet. This is much bigger. So what should we call ourselves? Well, that was a very long discussion. So one of the ideas was, how about the Engineering Planning Group? Well, that's EGP. No, EPG. That's me. It couldn't be EPG again. And also, there was already taken. The Federal Engineering Planning Group existed. There was the IEPG, so we couldn't use International Engineering Planning Group or Internet Engineering Planning Group. People tried to come up with all sorts of other names. And finally, someone said, well, how about Network Operators Group? And then our worldwide community said, well, but you know, you're kind of based in the US. You're really not worldwide. You can't be the Network Operators Group. So we debated and debated, and we decided on North American Network Operators Group. Oh, finally, what a relief. We had a name. But then the debate didn't end, unfortunately. How do we say NANOG? Is it NANOG? Is it NANOG? Is it NANOG? Who are we? How do we say it? Actually, that took about 3 meetings. We couldn't resolve that in one. It was not such a simple thing. Finally, as you realize, we did stick with NANOG. So January 1994 was the time we decided that regional techs would morph into NANOG. There was a charter written by Mark Knopper and myself. You can find it in the ancient history files on the NANOG page and on the Merit web page. And since that time, we've had many, many different chairpersons or mistresses of ceremony. I never thought of myself as a chair, and I was the first mistress of ceremony for the NANOG meetings. And we were somewhat loosely organized in those days. Merit continued to sponsor, as they do today, and they've always been a very gracious sponsor. But at that point in time, we had to grow because now we were no longer under the government umbrella. And in 1995, I handed over my mistress of ceremony hat to Bill Norton, who became the chair. And Bill at that time was going to business school. And so NANOG was kind of like his experiment. Bill decided that all the things he learned in business school, he should test on NANOG. Most of them were very successful. So he, instituted the beer and gear. He instituted numbering NANOG. He decided we needed T-shirts. Bill did an awful lot of neat things, and he did get sponsorships, which helped him, as you saw today. You can't have these meetings without the sponsors. But Bill also was a very interesting speaker, even before he became the chair. A long time ago, when we were still using the overhead projector, we were taping also some of the meetings and some of the presentations. And so Bill was up here and he was walking back and forth. I can't do it because you won't hear me, but he would walk back and forth like this from side to side, but much further. And then all of a sudden, he would just disappear. And he'd do it over and over again. And we're going, what the heck is going on? So after his presentation, I think Kathy and I together asked Bill, we said, what were you thinking? He said, I wanted to see if the cameraman could keep up with me. So, you know, it was always very collegial and a lot of fun, and we had such good times. So, anyway, we started NANOG, and it's been going on, and I thought, how can I spend 45 minutes just talking about the history? How boring can that be? So I really thought I needed to give you a few stories. So one of the stories was we had one chair who always opened the meetings with a joke. This person I've mentioned at least twice now, so that was Bill Norton. And those were the worst jokes I think I've ever heard in my life. I think one of them was, why did the chicken lay 2 eggs? The answer is because 1 is not enough. So if you were a French speaker, you might say an œuf. So anyway, you didn't laugh, neither did we back in the day. And then I heard from Craig Labovitz this morning that in the early days of Wi-Fi, he'd gotten a whole bunch, Merritt had gotten a whole bunch of Wi-Fi repeaters from DEC, and they were having a NANOG meeting in one of those huge big hotels with atriums. And so they were early in the morning walking around planting the repeaters in the planters on the different floors to see how far they could get Wi-Fi up to their room. Well, I guess someone didn't really understand why they were gardening and putting these electronic things in the planters, so the security guards were called. And so Craig and his cohort had to try and explain that these were Wi-Fi, they're wireless. You could actually get connections. And they said, what do you mean? And they said, well, you know, like the internet. Well, the hotel didn't even have internet access. It was prior to that. So, I don't know, luckily he wasn't arrested and he was able to just to be the chair of the meeting that day. But that was one of the other things that had happened. One of the stories that Mark Knopper wanted to share was how NANOG and its community was always very socially conscious. And we had planned a meeting in Colorado once. Colorado at that time had just decided to pass some legislation which was anti-gay rights. So there was a large part of the NANOG community that really didn't want to have the meeting. They wanted to boycott the meeting in Colorado because of this legislation. There was a big debate, you know, what to do. Should we boycott? Should we not boycott? You know, what's the deal? So the compromise solution was, well, we would invite a gay rights speaker and put them on the agenda. So we expanded the agenda, and then we did have the meeting in Colorado after all. So these are just a few of the stories that I wanted to share. And I think one of the most well-known stories is the one about Bob Metcalf. And can I see a show of hands? How many of you have heard about the Bob Metcalf story? Oh, you have the shirt. You have both shirts or just one shirt? Wow. So that means quite a few of you haven't heard the story. So I'll read the quote, first of all. In 1995, and well, I should ask a show of hands, who knows who Bob Metcalf is? Oh, that's good. If you didn't raise your hand, you were in big trouble. You were in the wrong meeting. So in 1995, Bob Metcalf attended one of the NANOG meetings. And afterwards, he wrote something, and it was a long article. But one of the pieces of the article said, if NANOG is to lead us toward an industrial strength internet, then it must now urgently attract the active participation of many more men and women who routinely wear suits. So if you look across the room, we seem to have done okay. We're not wearing too many suits yet, or we left them in the closet. And so that led to a whole spat of emails. There was a big furor, lots of back and forth on the NANOG list. And finally, Bob wrote back, and what he said was, we had misunderstood him, and what he really meant was good engineers are too valuable to overdress. So, but he did think that in order for the internet and NANOG to continue to succeed, we would have to be more open to the people in suits who were more business-minded and just less technical-minded. I think that NANOG's managed to survive all this time by being inclusive, and so we don't frown necessarily on suits, but we don't necessarily adopt them either. So the other thing that Metcalf had said is he predicted the collapse of the internet in 1996, and he and Bill got into a sparring on that, and I guess Metcalf said, well, I'd eat my words if it doesn't collapse, because of course it's going to collapse. And sure enough, in 1996, he ate his words, and Bill made his second Bob Metcalf shirt. So those of you who haven't seen it, Bill has a really nice website that has a picture of all the NANOG t-shirts, including the Bob Metcalf collector's items. So I didn't really want to belabor this with too much history. I wanted to share a few small stories from our early days. And then I thought I'd like to give you a little quiz. And those of you who raise your hand for, I guess, 3 out of 3 questions, you obviously either read your history or you were there, and you're an old gray head like me. So please raise your hand if you know what a foil is. And I don't mean a fencing foil. Oops, not too many of you. Okay. That's one question. Second question. I gave you a hint earlier. Do you know what EGP is? What does the protocol stand for? Okay, good work, good work. And then the last one is, do you know what whirly ball is? Okay. Those of you who raised your hand for whirly ball are truly the NANOG pioneers. So in the early days of NANOG, we had, in fact, in regional techs, we had introduced socials. And I heard you all had a great social last night at the aquarium. They've gotten a lot more organized, a lot more sophisticated maybe, but boy did we have fun with whirly ball. Now whirly ball, for those of you of the uninitiated, is kind of like lacrosse in bumper cars. And you have 2 teams of 5, and you have a basketball hoop, and you have a high-lie racket, and you're driving these little electric cars. So it's 5 on 5. You're not allowed to get out of the car, and you have a wiffle ball. And you can pass the wiffle ball around, and you have to shoot a basket, and you get points. So it was a great game, and it was great fun. And it was self-funded. So we used to see who wanted to play whirly ball. We'd collect the money. I was the money collector. Then we'd buy cases of beer, and we'd go out to the whirly ball place, and we'd split up into teams. Well, after a few whirly ball games, there were a few people who only wanted to play with each other, and they became the superstars. They were led by Vince Fuller. Is Vince around? Anyway, Vince had the superstar team, and they were pretty awesome. They really didn't want anybody else on their team because they were winners. Except when they lost, as Kathy just said. So then we had everybody else. And then we had some people who never won, so they decided to form their own team. They were kind of the also-rans, and they challenged Vince's team. It was kind of, I think, maybe the last whirly ball game, because I know the superstars never played after that. They were so crushed. But they did lose the game. But if you ever get a chance, you really should do a NANOG tradition and go play whirly ball. There are only about 5 of them in the country. One of them's in Ann Arbor still. But give it a shot. It's great fun. You get in these little bumper cars. You're raising your hand? There's one in Atlanta. You could have a 50th NANOG whirly ball game, and I could even collect the money for you. I'm quite good at that part, managing that. So I really don't have many more stories to share. There were so many good times. It was such a great experience to be part of the beginning, which was regional techs. It was great to be part of the end of the beginning, which was the next stage, which is NANOG. Everything has a cycle. And we cycled through regional techs. NANOG's evolved as it's grown and as more and more people have participated. And many of us have continued our participations, sometimes not as frequently as we'd like, but many of the people who are here, like Dave Meyer, who's sitting behind me, he was just a kid at University of Oregon doing some multicast research when we discovered him. I consider that we discovered you, Dave. Invited him to speak at NANOG. And look at his career since. He's become well-renowned. He's now sitting here on the stage at the 50th NANOG. But I want to thank you all again for inviting me to be here for this momentous occasion. And I hope you enjoy whirly ball when you get out there. Thank you.
Wow. I don't remember all of that. I do remember, though, at the first NANOG I went to where these guys invited me, I made the mistake, I confused Sue, I said, who would ever confuse Sue Harris and Susan Harris? And I did it. So I remember doing that. Okay, so next.